We're all standing in a corner here.
We live. Right, thank you very much, everybody. Sorry for being a few minutes late. Always lots of things to deal with, but welcome to you all to this Accountability Board. Just if you could, we could go around the table and introduce ourselves as normal. I'm Sarah Dance, I'm Chair of the Accountability Board.
Suzanne Bennett, I am the Chief Operating Officer of SELEP.
Simon Cook, representing Further Education.
Ron Woodley, Deputy Leader of South England Sea Park Council, Soon-to-be City.
Keith Glazier, Leader of East Sussex County Council.
Rosie Chambers, Medway Council.
Amy Ferraro with the SELEP Secretariat.
Rob Gatehill, Leader of Thurrock Council.
Roger Garth, Leader, Kent County Council.
Leslie Wagland, Cabinet Member at Essex for Economic Renewal, Infrastructure and Planning.
Stephanie Ennis from Essex Legal Services. Helen Dyer, Capital Programme Manager for SELEP.
Thank you. And we've got Rosemary, who's joining us remotely. So Rosemary, do you want to introduce yourself?
Rosemary Nunn, Higher Education Representative.
Thank you very much. So just as a reminder, when you're voting, please could you, the microphones are on, as you know, and Stephanie Mitchell is joining us. So Stephanie, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Stephanie Mitchener, representing the Section 151 Officer of the Accountable Body.
Thank you very much. Welcome. So when you're voting, if you could raise your hand so I can see you, so it's all very clear for everybody. And as you know, members of the public are able to join the meeting and officers are listening into the meeting as well. So a recording of the meeting will be available on the LEP website after the meeting has concluded. So for those who are attending the meeting virtually, please can you not use the chat function, and if there are any technical issues, please remain on the call and we'll try and make sure that Amy brilliantly joins you back in again. Thank you very much. There aren't any confidential items requiring discussion. Helen, any apologies, please?
Yes, so we've received apologies from Councillor Bentley and he is represented today by Councillor Wagland. We have also received apologies from Councillor Coxall, who's presented by Councillor Glazier. And as already mentioned, Rosemary is unable to join in person, but is with us virtually.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on swiftly to the minutes of the last meeting. Is everybody happy with the minutes of the last meeting? Can you confirm them?
Yep.
Fine.
I'm happy with them. Just one thing, it's only a very small thing. Do we need to note in membership who was in person and who was online? It's only a small, tiny detail, but
Legally, do we need to do that?
I don't think legally we need to, but that's whether it's
Oh,
best
good
practice.
practice, probably.
Yeah, we'll ask for that done in future. Which is a point of good practice.
Thank you. But apart from that, everybody else is happy. Thank you very much. Okay, so declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Chambers.
Yes, I have an interest in the Growing Places Fund update report, in as much that I am a trustee of the historic dockyard at Chatham, and there is an item on there that refers to the historic dockyard, the fitting rigging house. I do not have a financial interest, but I therefore will have the right to speak on the matter, but I will not vote.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to declare an interest, two non-pecuniary interests in that. As chair of Creative Estuary, we are investing in the docking station, which is it's part of both the university and the dockyard. So just to be really upfront at that, we're investing in the feasibility study for the docking station. So, thank you. Okay, are there any anything else? No. All right. So. There aren't any public questions, are there? No. Okay, so let's move swiftly on to item 5, which is Getting Building Fund Capital Programme Update. Helen.
So this item provides the usual update on the Getting Building Fund programme and sets out spend forecast for the remainder of the programme. GBF spend of 17.8 million is currently forecast for 22-23, and the accountable body continues to hold funds funding. Under agenda item 6, the board will be asked to consider how to most effectively manage the GBF funding forecast to spend after March, which is currently still held by Essex County Council. As usual, the report provides updates on all projects which have previously received approval for retention of the GBF funding beyond the end of March, and highlights ongoing risks to project delivery. A full review of the deliverability of all the projects which have received approval for retention of their GBF funding beyond the end of March will be carried out. An update on their continued ability to deliver by September 2022 will be provided at the April board meeting. The report identifies 9 projects which are considered to be high risk. 5 of these have been identified because they have indicated that they are no longer able to spend their GBF funding in full by the end of March, and these will be considered in the next agenda item. The 6th project is the UTC Maritime and Sustainable Technology Hub. This project is still considered to be high risk as the previously identified lease issues have not yet been fully resolved. However, progress has been made. It is currently anticipated that the acquisition of the lease will be complete by the end of February. The next project is Riding Sunbeams. As the board are aware, delivery of this project is dependent upon progression of the Network Rail's RIP process, which in itself presents the risk of timely delivery. It's also noted that receipt of the required approvals from Network Rail have been further pushed back as a direct result of delays in the provision of required information from UK Power Networks. Due to these factors, there remains an element of uncertainty around the timetable for construction and completion of the project, which will be further addressed at the next meeting. The 8th project is the Jaywick Market and Commercial Space project. At the last meeting, the board agreed that the project could retain its GBF allocation beyond the end of March. However, it was noted that procurement for the construction contractor was ongoing, and therefore there was a risk of cost increases. The procurement process has now been completed, and the tenders received were significantly higher than anticipated. Work is ongoing to secure the required additional funding to enable the project to progress to delivery, and the funding package will be confirmed at the April board meeting. Due to the scale of the cost increase, there is a requirement for a formal board decision to be taken to agree the increase in total project cost as per the requirements of the assurance framework. However, before this decision can be taken, assurances need to be received regarding the value for money offered by the project. An indicative updated value for money assessment has been completed, which demonstrates that the project will continue to offer high value for money. However, this needs to be reviewed by the ITE before it can be presented to the board. This assessment will be provided to the board in April. However, in the meantime, whilst acknowledging the risk posed by the current funding gap, it is recommended that GBF spend on the project is allowed to continue. The final high-risk project is Better Queensway. The GBF funded enabling work forms a very small part of a major regeneration project. And this presents a number of risks as the wider project is not as far progressed as the majority of the GBF project. However, the primary risk at this stage is related to the potential implications of the decision by the regulator for social housing to downgrade Swan Housing Association's viability and governance grade, and Swan Housing's announcement of a partnership with Orbit. At this stage, indications are that the project will proceed as planned. However, there are ongoing discussions with the various parties involved in the project to seek firm confirmation of project safety. Finally, there are a number of programme-wide risks set out in the report which continue to be monitored. As has been reported at both this meeting and previous meetings, there is a significant risk of cost increases due to inflation, materials cost increases, and extended lead-in time. This is presenting substantial risk to the delivery of some of the GBF projects, particularly those which are in the early stages of delivery. In addition, significant cost increases could present a risk to the value for money offered by the project. I would ask that if any GBF projects are facing delivery concerns, that early warning is given wherever possible, so that we have time to work with the relevant local partners to help determine the best way forward within the conditions of the grant and the requirements of the assurance framework.
Thank you, Helen.
I think Helen summed it up pretty well, especially on the Better Queensway project. I was informed of other issues last night, very late, but we will inform Helen and Co as soon as we know more of the final details.
Thank you, Councillor Ridley. Councillor Wagner.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, we at Essex support very much the continuation of these projects and understand the position in relation to risk. I probably ought to just mention something about the JWIC Market and Commercial Space project. The tenders have come in very substantially more, virtually doubling the cost of the project. We knew that just before Christmas and have been working strenuously since then to deal with bridging this gap. We are confident that we're going to be able to bridge that gap, subject to going through formal governance procedures. I'm expecting to get a report brought back to me in the next fortnight. So we would suggest that this still should remain where it is, predominantly because the benefit cost ratio value for money of the project remains high, and because of the elements of levelling up and deprivation that we're dealing with in relation to JWIC. I would hope that the indications I'm able to give verbally now about where the governance process sits gives some comfort to the board that this is being dealt with at pace, and that this is not a project that we are looking to say is problematic at this stage, and we hope that the funding gap is bridgeable.
Thank you.
I just like on record, I love JWIC.
Yeah.
So I want to be careful I don't just dip into item 6 as well, because it sort of relates to that. But I noticed from this particular paper, we're talking about the risks to the GBF projects, and it's clear to me that it's about 40% of all the projects are either 4 or 5 in our reg rating. So there's obviously much higher risk in the GBF fund compared to some of our other funds. When I read the risk plan that we've got in there, it mentions COVID further down in the rating. Higher up in the rating is, of course, not meeting the deadlines of 31st of March. If the majority have been impacted by COVID, does it allow us to provide an automatic extension to the deadline, or something that alleviates the pressure on that 31st of March deadline, or is that just impossible to be able to do?
So we have already agreed, this board has already agreed a maximum 6-month extension for those projects which are unable to deliver by the 31st of March. This is a board decision, it's not government has sticking with the 31st of March deadline, but this board have allowed 6-month flexibility for those projects which have been impacted.
And we agreed that quite a while ago, didn't we?
Last July.
So what we knew last July compared to what we know now is quite different.
Yes, there is, as I mentioned, I'm going to do an assessment of all those projects which are still ongoing before the April board meeting, and there will be consideration of options available to board at that meeting, and it may be that it's prudent to allow further extension to allow delivery where projects have been significantly impacted.
I know everybody will have the best intent, but I won't be surprised if you say 6 months' time we suddenly hear a whole load of new risks around labour supply and contractors being unable to get sufficient enough labour to meet specific deadlines. So I think all of those are wrapped into post-COVID challenges that are pretty easy to recognise now without that being, I suppose, there's a balance between what we allow individual projects to get away with in slippage and which ones are real genuine reasons. But there does tend to be a theme. So
yes,
I'd encourage us to think about whether we need to change that extension. But I know that's sort of
that is something that will be raised at the April board meeting once I've done a reassessment of all those projects.
Cool. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Simon. I think it's very true to say that the communication between us and the people who are doing the work and the delivery continues really clearly, and that as you've both, Councillor Woodley and Councillor Wagland, both highlighted, there are ongoing issues with many of the projects, and we need to make sure that we are continuing to monitor this. And so the April meeting will be very important to that, Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think come April, we have to really put our hands up and say, look, we have problems ongoing, and be honest with ourselves and the board.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, just one last point. I suppose my point being on that is that I don't doubt anybody in the room who's responsible for projects is not be honest. I'm not entirely sure a lot of contractors will be very honest, because they'll need to secure the work, and our procurement frameworks will probably facilitate that really well, but then all of a sudden that's when problems come out, and that's not going to dissipate at all in the next 6 to 12 months. So that was my point there.
Yeah. I think the good news is I can tell you this in relation to JWIC, the contractors have been definitely honest, or at least honest to a point, to a fault, I think. So yes, I think we do know their position is the contractors.
And I think it only emphasises the importance of bringing high-risk projects back to the board and continuing to monitor them on an ongoing basis. Okay, so thank you. That was a really useful conversation. So I'd like us to note the current forecast spend for the GBF programme for 2021-22 financial year of 53.569 million as set out in Table 1. To note the updates on the projects which have received approval for retention of GBF funding beyond 31st of March 2022. Note the identified risk to the delivery of the Jaywick Market and Commercial Space project, noting that a formal decision regarding the increase in project costs and ongoing assurance regarding the value for money offered by the project will be sought from the board in April 2022. And note the update on the GBF projects which have been identified as high risk. Thank you. Okay, so on item 6, what I'm going to suggest we do actually is move the agenda around slightly. So I think because it's a sort of summation, is move that to after agenda item 9, so that the board have a really full understanding of the risks and the funding positions which form part of the consideration of the report. So that's, if that's all right with everybody, to move that item. Great. So we're going to move then on to item 7, which is the Getting Building Fund retention of funding beyond 31st of March 2022. Helen.
Thank you. So the board are asked to consider 5 requests from projects to retain their GBF funding allocation beyond March 2022. The reasons for each request is set out within the report. So I'm not going to repeat all that information. I'm just going to pick out a couple of key risks faced by each of the projects. So the first project to be considered is Langdon Place in Essex. The primary risk faced by this project relates to an outstanding Section 73 minor material amendment planning application, which seeks to formalise changes to the highway design, which have been agreed with Essex County Council. It was originally anticipated that this application will be determined in November. However, determination has been repeatedly delayed, and it is now expected that the application will be determined on the 23rd of February. The next project is Pendring Bike and Cycle Infrastructure. As referenced at the last board meeting, following consultation on the proposed cycle route, concerns were raised about some elements of the route. To address these concerns, the changes have been made, and these are now progressing. Procurement of a construction contractor was in progress prior to the changes being made, and a preferred contractor had been identified. The report outlines a risk that a new procurement exercise may need to be undertaken due to the change of scope in work. However, it has since been confirmed that the original contractor appointment will stand and these works can commence, but an additional procurement exercise will be undertaken to cover the areas of the route where changes have been made. This procurement exercise will be conducted over a short time period and will not therefore impact on the ability of the project to deliver by September. Moving on to Discovery Park, whilst contractual commitments are expected to be in place, were expected to be in place with the principal construction contractor by the end of January, there remains a risk that contractual commitments in relation to some work packages may not be in place until February 2022. Ongoing procurement also presents a risk of potential cost increase. The fourth project is the Romney Marsh Employment Hub. Delivery of the drainage and highway elements of the project have been progressing well. However, delays have been encountered on utility infrastructure work. Approval of proposed designs is still awaited from UK Power Network and Southern Gas Network. In addition, planning consent with regard to the Section 106 agreement with Southern Water is not currently in place, but is expected in February. The final project is the LSFN project, which is seeking to improve broadband fibre connectivity across the South Essex region. This project is nearing completion, and there is little risk of project delivery. A 2-month extension has been requested to enable completion of the final work and receipt of final invoices. There are 2 options available to the board in each case. Either approval is given for the requested retention of GBF funding beyond March 2022, or it is considered that the project does not meet the conditions and criteria previously agreed by the board, and the project is removed from the GBF programme with the funding award reallocated to alternative projects. If the board chooses to approve the retention of GBF funding against any of the projects outlined in this report, the identified risks will be monitored and regular updates will be provided to the board to ensure the projects remain on programme.
Thank you, Helen. Comments? Councillor Goff.
Can I just, on Discovery Park, there's been actually some quite material developments since the paper was written, which I think are actually quite encouraging. So just to add to those, they've now, in the course of this week, I understand, they've appointed a principal contractor, they've appointed a mechanical and electrical engineering contractor, they've even appointed the ductwork contractor. So a great deal has gone on. So those are actually, those three packages are the vast majority of the contractual commitments. They're now in place. There are some small additional, well, smaller and more specialist contracts, in particular, for instance, in relation to sprinklers and fire sprinkler systems and so on, but quotes again have been received, should be entered into over the coming month or two in terms of contracts. And the price of the main ones align more or less with the original cost estimates. So I think things have actually moved in a more positive direction than was indicated, than was, to be fair, available to the team when the report was put together. And we'd be obviously able to give a further update at the April meeting.
Thank you, that's very useful to hear. Thank you. Councillor Gledhill and then Councillor Wagler.
Just on the LFFN, make sure I get that one right. As Thurrock is the council that's responsible for the project, we really do need to reinforce it's not actually just in Thurrock, it is right across the whole of the Astor area, with the exception of South End, who went a different route. And it just shows you how little has been done in fibre networking across the whole of the country, certainly across South Essex. But we've got cable ducts that are completely flat, that need to be cleared before they can start laying relevant cables. And I didn't realise it actually, but I should probably declare a slight interest in relation to this. I've just gone on to full fibre network because one of the nodes was directly opposite my house and no one knew. So at the end of the pandemic, when everyone's working at home, I've now got full fibre connectivity to go back to the office. However, my Netflix streaming is fantastic, thank you very much. Seriously, where we've been knocking on doors, not just in Thurrock, but across South Essex, a number of people that have said, we really wish you'd done more on this, because we still won't get the benefit of this because we're too far away from a local government node. But those that are close to it saying it's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it is a very small extension on the project. And I think this will be something that we'll be looking for more funding across ASLA to expand it even further, because it's been received so very, very well, not just in rural communities, but also I live in a semi-industrial area. So businesses and local residents have benefited from it. And again, it's not just in Thurrock where we've gone cross borders to do canvassing, it's also hitting very well elsewhere, except South End.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wagland and then Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I think the matters that Helen has mentioned in relation to two of our projects, the Langdon and tendering one, both I think indicate that there is progress and that we know where that progress is, and that there are timescales that are now advanced and are going to enable us to reach a much better view with the benefit of that extension.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
As Rob actually mentioned, Southend, so you started this progress back in 2014, and we've come to the end now, and it's certainly a benefit. And Southend is virtually covered completely with superfast broadband. This is good.
Thank you. Okay, so we have to take each project. We've got two options in front of us, and we'll do each project one by one. I think that's the way we have to do it, isn't it? Yeah. So the option one in front of us, I'm going to start with Lanes in Place. So do we agree that the Lanes in Place meets the conditions and criteria previously agreed by the board for the retention of GBF funding beyond 31st of March for a maximum period of 6 months, subject to strategic board endorsement at the March 2022 meeting? That's the Lanes in Place. Okay. For tendering bikes and cycle infrastructure, is it agreed that the project meets the conditions and criteria previously agreed by the board for retention of the GBF funding beyond 31st of March 2022 for a maximum period of 6 months, subject to strategic board endorsement at the March 2022 meeting? Thank you. So Discovery Park incubator, Do we agree that the project meets the conditions and criteria previously agreed by the board for the retention of GBF funding beyond the 31st of March 2022 for a maximum period of 6 months, subject to strategic board endorsement at the March 2022 meeting? Thank you. And Romney Marsh and Employment Hub, do we agree that the project meets the conditions and criteria previously agreed by the board for the retention of the GBF funding beyond the 31st of March 2022 for a maximum period of 6 months, subject to strategic board endorsement at the March 2022 meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. And then finally, the LFFN project, do we agree that the project meets the conditions and criteria previously agreed by the board for the retention of GBF funding beyond the 31st of March 2022 for a maximum period of 6 months, subject to strategic board endorsement at the March 2022 meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to go on to item 8. I'm handing it over to Howard here. This is setting building funding decisions. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So this report considers the award of GBF funding to the Princess Alexandra Hospital relocation of postgraduate medical centre, Food Street and Braintree active travel projects. All three of these projects are currently forecasting full spend of their GBF funding by the 31st of March 2022. So I'll now give a brief overview of the three projects that we're talking about. So Princess Alexandra Hospital relocation of postgraduate medical centre in Harlow. The project is seeking to deliver new medical training facilities on the Princess Alexandra Hospital site. The new building is predominantly complete, and GBF will allow fit out of the building and the accelerated realisation of the benefits set out in the report. The primary risks which may impact on project delivery relate to the impacts of COVID-19 on working practices and supply chains, which have the potential to both extend the delivery programme and increase costs. The report indicates that SELEP's monitoring and evaluation requirements have not been fully met, and therefore it is recommended that the condition requiring completion of the outstanding M&E reports is attached to the award of any GBF funding for the project. Whilst the required M&E documentation has now been provided, they have not yet been submitted to the ITE, and therefore at this time it is recommended that the condition remains attached to the funding award. Food Street Eastbourne. The Food Street project is currently seeking to return 5 commercial units to effective use, supporting the development of a vibrant, independent food and drink-based economy in Eastbourne. The project represents the first phase of a wider regeneration plan, which have been supported through the Levelling Up Fund. The majority of risks have already been mitigated as the project is nearing completion. However, there are risks for the forecast project benefits due to COVID-19 having impacted on the leisure and tourism sector. Eastbourne Borough Council has seen a positive response from local independent businesses to this project, suggesting that this risk is low. Finally, Braintree active travel project in Essex. This project is at the bottom of the GBF pipeline and was seeking GBF investment totaling £2 million. Following the allocation of funding to projects higher in the pipeline, a balance of £291,000 remains, and the project has brought forward a business case for this amount. The project is seeking to deliver a package of sustainable transport improvements in Braintree. These improvements will include both permanent and temporary segregated corridors, footway widening, junction improvements, and crossing improvements. The GBF funding will specifically be used for the introduction of improved cycle facilities in the vicinity of the Braintree train station. Work is expected to commence on site in March 2022, with procurement currently ongoing. Given that procurement has not yet been completed, there does remain a risk of cost increases due to COVID-19 and Brexit impacts on supply chains. The construction programme allows a very short window for the GBF to be spent, given that approval for the retention of GBF beyond the 31st of March 2022 has not been sought. This risk could be exacerbated due to the need to coordinate the planned work with other roadworks in the area. If the board chooses to award GBF funding for the project outlined in this report, this will be subject to receipt of government approval for project inclusion within the GBF programme. I'm now going to hand over to Stephen Bishop of Steer to talk through the ITE process.
Thank you, Howard. Stephen.
Good morning. As part of our work as independent technical evaluator for the LEP, we assess business cases based on their value for money. And this is not only the economic appraisal's benefit cost ratio, but a broader understanding of the strategic and economic case and deliverability of the scheme, and that presents value for money. We also consider the likely certainty of that value for money and the outputs being delivered. So we consider factors such as whether the scheme has planning permission, section 151 officer approval, and whether land acquisition and other common issues have been addressed. Chair and Howard, would you like me to go through the three schemes that have been mentioned?
Yes, quickly though, but with a good technical eye on it.
Good. So for Princess Alexandra Hospital requesting £500,000, we've assessed this as having high value for money, but low to medium certainty. The scheme is requesting use of the assurance frameworks exemption. I have been asked to remind board members of the wording of this exemption. It's section V 3.3 of the LEP's assurance framework, that certain projects may be eligible for exemption from the conditions stated in D above. That's for a benefit cost ratio above 2 to 1 under one of the following exemptions. And it's exemption 1 that's being deployed on 2 of these schemes, that the project has a benefit to cost ratio of greater than 1.51, or the project benefits are notoriously difficult to appraise in monetary terms, that the funding sought from SELEP is less than £2 million. To conduct further quantified and monetized economic appraisal would be disproportionate to the LGF or other funding ask, and there is an overwhelming strategic case, and if the benefits were quantified would most likely increase the benefit cost ratio to above 2 to 1. So for these new training facilities for the Princess Alexandra Hospital, some parallel economic appraisal that we conducted as part of our assessment suggested that the benefit cost ratio would be 2.32 to 1, and therefore in line with the exemption, and we support the recommendation that a monitoring and evaluation plan be completed before funding is transferred.
Thank you.
The sound wasn't great, but did we cover Braintree, Active Travel and Seven Sisters?
Yes, please.
So for Braintree Active Travel, high value for money, but low to medium certainty. This is due to the BCR, the benefit cost ratio being low, but we think a reasonable, robust approach has been taken. The scheme would see a missing link completed in cycling infrastructure and walking infrastructure between the station and new and existing communities development. A 5% uplift was assumed for cycling along the corridor. We believe that to be too conservative, and if a more reasonable level assumption of 15% were used, that would increase the benefit cost ratio to more than 2 to 1. And then finally on Seven Sisters Country Park uplift, requesting 200.
Jumped onto 9.
You jumped. You're on. We need Food Street, not.
Sorry, the sound quality. Sorry, Food Street, high value for money, high certainty, reasonable and robust approach. 440 square meters of new commercial floor space. Increase in visitor spend resulting in a benefit cost ratio of 2.19 to 1 and 10 gross additional FTEs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Did you write that for me?
Are there any comments, queries from anybody? No? Okay. So do we agree the award of 500,000 GBF to Essex County Council for further award to Princess Alexandra Hospital NHS Trust, the Princess Alexandra Hospital, the relocation of postgraduate medical centre project, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with low medium certainty of achieving this. Value for money exemption 1 applied. Subject to, and it's important to note this, it's subject to government approval of the project inclusion within the GBF programme and the submission of a completed monitoring and evaluation plan and baseline report by the 28th of February 2022. Do we agree that? Agree. Agree the award of 100,000 GBF to East Sussex County Council for further award to Eastbourne Borough Council for the Food Street project, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with a high certainty of achieving this, subject again to government approval of project's inclusion within the GBF programme. agree the award of 291,100,000 GBF to Essex County Council for the Braintree Active Travel Project, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with low medium certainty of achieving this. Value for money exemption 1 applied, subject to the government approval of the project's inclusion within the GBF programme. Thank you. Okay, let's move then on to item 9. Helen.
Thank you. So the report, as set out in the pack, covers funding decisions for the 7 Sisters Country Park Vista Infrastructure Uplift and Tech Port projects. However, I have not yet received Section 151 off the sign-off. Councillor Goff?
I can confirm that we have got approval on that. Apparently, there was, I think, something that we were waiting for from the district council, and that's all fine. I have confirmation from the Section 151 officer. So
okay, so
in the mix of time.
Okay, so the signed business case will be forwarded to me.
Yeah, and they were writing to you, I believe. Yes.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'll go back.
Yeah.
So do we actually have the signed business case? Sorry, is it?
I don't know. Which is what I'm going to check. What we have.
We can make it as a conditional approval,
Yeah.
that depending on us receiving that business case.
Yeah, there is something that will be sent to SELEP team. The wording is slightly vague, but I assume it is their business case that will be sent to SELEP team shortly. Within 30 minutes, I'm told.
Okay. We will add that as a condition. It sounds like it will be met very quickly. Okay, so back to where I was. So yes, so this report does consider the award of funding for both the technical and services of the infrastructure uplift projects. Both of these projects are forecasting spend of their GBF funding beyond March 2022, and therefore this forms a key part of the consideration of funding awards. So the Tech Port project is seeking to bring the casemates at the Citadel into beneficial economic use, helping to stabilise the ancient monument and create jobs in Dover. The GBF funding will enable delivery of the first phase of a long-term vision for the site. Work is expected to commence on site in Q1 22-23. However, this is subject to receipt of required planning and scheduled monument consent. As set out in the report, it is understood that these applications have not yet been submitted, and this presents a significant risk to project delivery. Expected timelines for determination of the planning application and scheduled monument consent have been provided, with the planning application expected to be determined within 8 weeks of validation, and the scheduled monument consent is expected to take approximately 52 days, although this could be extended to 91 days for decision. Given that project delivery cannot commence until these consents are in place, it is recommended that if the board choose to award funding for the project, but this is subject to receipt of confirmation that all required consents have been secured by the 20th of May. As the required consents are not yet in place, procurement has not yet been undertaken, and therefore there remains a risk of cost increases, which will adversely impact both the deliverability and value for money offered by the project. As indicated, it will not be possible for GBF funding to be spent in advance of 31st of March 2022, and therefore approval for retention of the GBF funding beyond March is required. As outlined in the report, the project is unable to meet some of the conditions previously agreed by the board, including confirmation all required planning consents are in place by the 31st of December, and contractual commitments with the construction contractor were in place by the 31st of January. We currently forecast the GBF spend will extend into Q3 22-23. This is not in line with the decision made by the board, which specified a maximum 6-month extension. If the board chooses to award funding for this project, thereby agreeing the retention of GBF funding against the project for longer than 6 months after March 2022, then the board will need to agree the rationale under which the project should be treated as an exception. Moving on to the 7 Sisters Country Park project, this project is seeking to deliver a comprehensive refresh of the visitor offer at the park. The GBF funding will allow elements of the project which have previously been removed from scope due to budget pressures to be reinstated, including refurbishment and fit-out of the pump farm, creating a multi-use retail, exhibition and event space. Delivery of the wider project is already underway. However, the GBF funded elements of the project are still subject to detailed design and procurement. As a result, there remains a significant risk of increased costs, which may impact on the South Downs National Park Authority's ability to deliver the full scope of work planned. As the GBF funded elements of the project are at a relatively early stage of development, it will not be possible for GBF funding to be spent in advance of 31st of March. The project does not meet all the conditions previously agreed by the board, as procurement has not yet been undertaken. However, it is currently expected that contractual commitments will be in place by May. If the board chooses to award GBF funding for the project outlined in this report, this will be subject to receipt of government approval for project inclusion within the GBF programme. There are two options available to the board. Option one is to agree the award of funding to the project subject to the conditions which have been outlined during this presentation and subject to government approval, and to agree that the GBF funding can be retained against projects beyond March 2022. This option will allow projects to progress to delivery. Option two is to agree that funding should not be awarded to support delivery of the project due to identified risks or the inability of the project to meet the criteria and conditions previously agreed by the board for retention of funding beyond March 2022. This may have implications for the outcome of SELEP's annual performance review of government, as government expectations regarding full commitment and transfer of the GBF funding by the 31st of March will not be met. However, the board are reminded that any decision to award funding for these projects will be subject to receipt of government approval, and there is a risk that if any of the identified projects deviate too far from government expectations, the approval may not be forthcoming. Once again, this would mean that funding would be uncommitted at the end of March. I'll now pass over to Steve for a quick summary of the IT assessment.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear us?
I can, thank you very much. I'll start with the tech fort at the Citadel. High value for money and low to medium certainty from our assessment, although a reasonable and a robust approach has been followed. As Helen mentioned, it brings buildings into use for employment and wider use, an assessment of 17 net FTE jobs, and a benefit cost ratio initially of 3.65 to 1, along with wider benefits around well-being and the arts. The risks, as mentioned and discussed, around Section 151 officer approval, planning permission from Dover District Council, and scheduled monument consent required from Historic England, and then the subsequent delay beyond the Getting Building Fund timelines, as mentioned. The Seven Sisters Country Park infrastructure uplift, again, our assessment is high value for money and low to medium certainty. Whilst a proportionate approach has been requested for this relatively low funding request, it is using the assurance framework exemption. The scheme provides upgraded vista facilities, including retail and event space, restrooms, and 3 holiday-let cottages, as well as improved warden facilities. The benefits from the economic case are predicated on increased visitor numbers and visitor spend, supporting 6.5 FTE net jobs. Risks, as mentioned, include delays to delivery of the project beyond the Getting Building Fund timelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Comments, Councillor Goff?
Thank you. I mean, in terms of tech support, clearly Steve's already set out as a very good value for money indeed, actually. I would add that if you look at what it involves, it is in a pretty deprived area. It is the use of historic monuments, and which is currently, that area of decay, frankly, after its previous use was suspended. So the arguments for it in terms of the merits of the case, if you like, are very strong. Now, I recognise, I think we've dealt with the Section 151 officer approval report and that issue. On the other two main concerns, which is planning permission and historic monument approval from DCMS, it's worth remembering that in effect, TechTalk was having put a case forward back in June 2020, was then effectively stood down, and then stood up again when it became clear we had some of the opportunities that we have in November of last year. So over about a month or two, they've been seeking to do what many other projects had 18 months or so to do. And I think certainly, particularly with both key players, but certainly now in the case of Dover District Council, the leader is very well aware, and you might imagine, given his ambitions for Dover, very supportive of it. So I don't think that there's the planning process to go through, which is separate and independent in the way that planning processes are, but nonetheless, there is certainly very strong awareness of it within DDC. I think similarly they have moved things forward rapidly with DCMS as well. So I think given the opportunities this presents, given that we would need, as I think was suggested in the paper, to come back in April to update what's happening on these, I would urge that we do take it forward, recognising that there are a whole number of the formal boxes that we established, including the 6-month timeline and the rest of it. This doesn't quite tick, but to some extent we are where we are in terms of the timing and when, as I say, this was kick-started again.
Thank you. Councillor Glazer.
Thank you. I mean, Techport and actually Seven Sisters have some similarity in the process, in as much as both have some risk, but actually most of them can be, in my opinion, overcome. And so therefore, I think we should support option 1 on both. The alternative doesn't, in my case, doesn't secure the 6.5 full-time posts, and it doesn't allow the, if you like, the best option to be taken forward for Seven Sisters. Anyone who knows Seven Sisters, most people part of the country, and would benefit from this, and the visitor numbers would definitely increase. So I'm quite happy to support option 1 on both of these.
Yes, sorry, Chairman, if I may say, subject slightly to one qualification, but just a phrase that keeps used. I would certainly nonetheless be very supportive of Seven Sisters as well.
Thank you, Simon.
Just to settle that score, I thought we were told last time that Jaywick is the most beautiful one.
Shall we settle for A? One of the most beautiful.
Well, I've walked both.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to my own question on this one, so I wouldn't mind. So it sounds like we've got potential commitment to two projects that both have risk and peril inherent in them. But I guess there's a great, I've got to word this right around, there's a greater risk of us not approving these, and then that's 1.2 million that just gets unallocated.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Or we have to go back into the pipeline, and there's probably other projects that either are just as much risk or not in the pipeline anyway. So
Yes, that is the greatest risk, that if it's not awarded, then that funding does remain uncommitted. Obviously, that is caveated by the fact that government decisions on these projects are still outstanding. They are work is in progress. Government are looking at them, but I haven't had a decision yet.
And that's the part we can't influence or control, really. So in respect of our decision here, it's either put 1.2 million to something or just give it back to government.
Except Techport hasn't yet gone to government, just to be clear. Yeah.
No, because I haven't received the section 151 off the sign off, but as soon as I've got that, it'll be forwarded on.
We're all
very short.
Yeah, just one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have a gauge for what I'm not asking you to have a crystal ball, but do we have any indication of whether or not they would be kicked back or not?
No. I've been asked a number of questions about the ones, the 4 other than Techport have been supplied to government. I have been asked a number of clarification questions, which I have responded to. But yes, I couldn't give you an indication either way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so as the board know, we have 2 options in front of us, and let's take Techport first. So option 1 on Techport is that, do we agree the award of 1,009,000 GBF to Kent County Council for the further award Dover Citadel Limited for the Techport project, which is, I'm just adding in these words, which aren't in the papers, subject to the business case signed off by the Section 151 officer of Kent County Council being received by SELEP by close of business today. So that's a new addition to our papers, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with a medium certainty of achieving this, subject to government approval of project inclusion within the GBF programme and confirmation of the receipt of all outstanding consents, including planning and scheduled monument consents, by the 20th of May 2022, and agree that the GBF funding can be retained against the project beyond March 2022 for a maximum period of 9 months as an exception, subject to strategic board endorsement in March 2022. Sorry, that was this is a long option, but there you go.
Sounds right.
Is that all clear?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, and then Seven Sisters Country Park visitor infrastructure. Option 1, which is, do we agree the award of 200,000 GBF to East Sussex County Council for the further award to the South Downs National Park Authority for the Seven Sisters Country Park Visitor Infrastructure Uplift Project, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with a low medium certainty of achieving this, brackets value for money exemption 1 applied, subject to government approval of project inclusion within the GBF programme, and agree that the GBF funding can be retained against the project beyond March 2022 for a maximum period of 6 months, subject to strategic board endorsement in March 2022.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, right, now we're going to return to item 6, which is, Helen, I'm going to hand over to you, which is management of the GBF funding forecast to spend after 31st March 2022.
Thank you. So, as we've already discussed, the GBF programme officially draws to a conclusion at the end of March, and there is a government expectation that the GBF funding will be fully committed and transferred to local partners by that date. However, there's not actually an end date specified within the grant offer letter, and therefore there is the potential for other options to be considered. So the report sets out that the maximum amount of GBF funding currently forecast to be held by the accountable body at the 31st of March is 19.2 million. However, this doesn't take into account 44 drawdown request forms, which have not yet been received from 4 of the 6 local partners. And it is therefore anticipated that the figure held by the accountable body will be close to 11 million by the end of March. There are 2 options set out within the report. Option 1 would allow the accountable body to obtain the GBF funding currently held, which is forecast to spend after March 2022. This funding would then be released during 22-23 as required to support project delivery. So as I've mentioned, the GBF grant conditions do not include an end date for the spend, so there's no scope for government to claw back this funding if it is not issued to the relevant partners by the 31st of March. This option would allow for more effective programme management of the remaining GBF funding over the coming months, and would remove the need for local partners to manage the additional funding through their own programmes through the use of option 4. This approach would also allow quicker reallocation of the funding should any of the projects be unable to proceed with plans, as it will remove the need for the funding to first be returned to the council body. However, as referenced, recent advice from government has suggested that adopting this approach could be detrimental to the outcome of SELEP annual performance review, as it will not be possible to demonstrate that government expectations have been met. In addition, there remains a risk for the reputation of both SELEP and the relevant local partners if the GBF funding is not spent in full by the 31st of March. Under option 2, this would allow, well, they should allow the remaining GBF funding to be transferred to the relevant local partners prior to the 31st of March, to either be applied within their own local capital programme or as an option 4 swap, or held as a ring-fenced capital grant. This option mirrors the approach adopted by the board with regard to the LGF funding at the end of March 2021. The report outlines a number of decisions which need to be made before steps can be taken to allow the remaining GBF funding to be transferred to the relevant local partners. A number of these decisions have been taken by the board today. However, there are still decisions to be made by government as to whether new projects can be included in the programme, and by strategic boards who will need to endorse all decisions to allow GBF funding to be retained against projects beyond March. If either strategic board or government do not support any decisions taken by the board today, there will be funding uncommitted at 31st of March, which the accountable body will continue to hold in 22-23. It is recommended that if this option is adopted, that conditions are attached to the release of funding allocated to projects which are considered to be high risk or which have outstanding funding conditions. These conditions are outlined in the report and reflect the points that have been discussed at this meeting. Subject to the outstanding decisions, this option should allow full transfer of remaining GBF funding by the 31st of March, ensuring that government expectations are met, minimising any potential reputational risks for SELEP and local partners. However, the implementation of option 4 swaps at this late stage of the financial year is likely to prove challenging for local partners, particularly for those with a larger amount of GBF spend forecast for 22-23. There remains a risk that projects may be removed from the programme if delivery proves difficult. This may pose a risk for local partners, as the GBF funding will have been spent within their own capital programme, meaning it's likely that an alternative funding source will need to be identified to allow timely repayment of the GBS funding. It is also likely to slow down the reallocation process. It will not be possible for alternative projects to benefit from the investment until the funding has been returned to the accountable body. In light of advice from government, it is recommended that the board choose option 2, as it should allow for government expectations to be met. There are a number of processes which need to be completed in order to implement option 2, including the completion of variation agreements, which set out conditions attached to the release of the funding, and the timely submission of drawdown request forms by local partners. The timeline is likely to prove challenging, and therefore support from local partners to ensure that actions are completed as quickly as possible will be needed if the board chooses this option.
Thank you, Helen. Do we have any queries, Simon?
So can you repeat what you said toward the end there? I think you said something that government advice is that option 2 is probably better.
In light of the advice from the government that the outcome of the annual performance review may be adversely impacted if we haven't issued all the GBS funding by the end of March. That's why we're recommending option 2, because it should allow government expectations to be met.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I attended the annual performance review meeting, and that was made very clear at that meeting. So, okay. Any other comments, queries?
It makes absolute sense.
Okay, so I'd like to go look at option 2, which is the recommended one first, if that's all right. We note the maximum value of the GBF currently forecast to still be held by the accountable body at the end of 2021-22 is 19.278 million, as set out in table 1 in the report. And then there's, do we agree that the remaining GBF is transferred to local partners by the 31st of March 2022, subject to the outcome of decisions set out in table 2 and the application of specific funding conditions to a number of the projects set out in table 3 of the report?
Agreed.
Do we agree that the unspent GBF held by the local partners at the end of 2021-22 must either be applied in line with the GBF SLA within their own local capital programme by 31st of March 2022 as an option 4 capital swap, or held as a ring-fenced capital grant? Agree that where the GBF has already been transferred to a local partners and remains unspent at the end of 2021-22 due to unplanned slippage of GBF from 2021-22 to 22-23, this should be added to the value of option 4 capital swap, or held by the local partner as a ring-fenced capital grant in line with the GBF SLA.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go on now to item 10, which is the Local Growth Fund Capital Up Programme Update. And Helen, you're on spotlight again.
Thank you. So this report provides the usual update on the Local Growth Fund Programme, including an update on LGF spend state and spend forecast for future years. As set out in the report, LGF forecast to spend in 21-22 has reduced by 7 million since the last update to the board. As a result, there is currently LGF funding totaling over 32.5 million forecast to spend in future years. Spend of this funding will continue to be monitored until all the LGF projects have been delivered. Within this report, the board are asked to consider whether the Bexhill Creative Workspace project should be allowed to continue LGF spend beyond September 21. As outlined in the report, construction has now been completed and the building has been handed over to Rother District Council. This happened in January 2022, and as a result, it is expected that full spend of the LGF allocation will be reported at the next board meeting. Following a review of the LGF projects remaining on the pipeline, Kent County Council has confirmed that the Maidstone East Station Access Improvement West Kent LSPF project no longer requires the additional LGF funding sought through the pipeline. As a consequence, the board are asked to agree the removal of the project from the pipeline. And finally, as with the Getting Building Fund, there are a number of programme-wide risks which continue to be monitored. Again, we have the significant risk around cost increases. The impact on the LGF programme is potentially less significant as the projects are generally more advanced or have already been completed. However, yes, again, if early warning can be given wherever there are problems, and then we can work with local partners to work out how best to continue the project within the conditions of the grant and the insurance framework.
Thank you. Any
comments or queries in this report? No. Okay, so do we agree the updated total planned LGF spend on project delivery in 2021-22 of 45.651 million, excluding DFT retained schemes, and increasing to 62.364 million, including DFT retained schemes, as set out in Table 1 and Appendix A. Note the deliverability and risk assessment as set out in the Appendix D. Do we agree the spend of LGF beyond the 30th of September 2021 and the revised completion date for the Bexhill Creative Workspace project as set out in Section 7 of this report, subject to Strategic Board endorsement in March 2022?
Agreed.
Agreed the removal of the Maidstone East Station Access Improvement West Kent LSTF project from the LGF project pipeline.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on swiftly then to item 11, Grays South LGF High Risk Project Update. Howard, and I think then we were going to also be joined by Keith Rumsey, possibly.
Me. That's a question.
Okay, question.
Okay, thank you. So this report provides the board with an update on the Grays South project and details cost increases which have prompted the project to be considered high risk. The project forms part of phase 2 of the Grays South Regeneration Area Scheme, with LGF funding in phase 2A, which will deliver an underpass to replace the existing railway level crossing and the creation of a public square in each end. Delivery of these works is dependent upon successful acquisition of existing properties. Completion of these works will enable delivery of phase 2B, which will bring forward new modern commercial mixed-use floor space for approximately 1,300 square metres, with residential units above creating the next 4 dwellings. Although these works are outside the scope of the LGF project, these benefits are included within the business case. The project has been awarded a total of 10.8 million LGF to support capital development costs, including land acquisition and professional fees associated with the completion of Governance for Railway Investment Project GRIP 2 and the commencement of GRIP 3. The GRIP process continues, and it was expected that the GRIP 4 process would complete at the end of January. However, this has been delayed, and a further update will be given at the April 2022 meeting. Land acquisitions have begun, and it is expected that a compulsory purchase order will commence when the planning application is submitted. Now, this, in the report, it does say that this was expected to be entered to the planning people at the end of January 2022. This is actually now on the 7th of February. That happened on the 7th of February, so it has been skipped a bit, but it's in. If a CPO is required, it will extend the project timeline by 12 to 18 months. As set out in the report, costs have risen significantly as the project has progressed. The Thurrock Council have increased their financial contribution accordingly. With the project still at an early stage of development, there is a risk that these costs will rise further, particularly in light of recent widely reported increases in construction and material costs. This gives rise to concerns regarding the ability of the project to continue to offer high value for money, as is required under the SELEP assurance framework. The VCR set out in the original business case was 2.4 to 1, which represented high value for money. However, sensitivity testing detailed in the business case suggests that the following consideration of cost increases outlined in the report, this may well have fallen below 2 to 1. As it is believed the project no longer meets the requirements of the SELEP assurance framework, spend of the LGF cannot continue without further review and update with value for money calculations. It is recommended that spend of the remaining 5.99 million LGF is placed on hold to allow Thurrock Council time to revisit the value for money calculations for the project and demonstrate compliance with the assurance framework. It is not expected that placing the LGF on hold would have a major impact on the delivery of the project at this time. The majority of LGF is required to support land acquisition, as mentioned, and these costs are not expected to be incurred until later in 2022-3 or even in 2023-4, if a CPO is required. It is understood that since the original business case submission, further work has been undertaken on the project, and additional benefits which were not quantified in the original benefit cost ratio calculations have been identified. The updated value for money assessment should take these benefits into account, and Thurrock Council remain confident that this assessment will show the project continues to offer high value for money. This information will be accompanied by a change request, which will set out the rationale for and implications of the increase in project costs identified within the report. It is intended that the updated value for money assessment and change request will be presented to the board in April 2022, following a review by the ITE for a decision regarding retention of the LGF funding allocated to the project. If the revised value for money assessment demonstrates that the project continues to offer high value for money, the board will be asked to agree that the LGF spend on the project can recommence. However, if this is not the case, the board will be asked to consider the clawback of some or all of the LGF allocated to the project due to a lack of compliance with the assurance framework.
Thank you. Any comments? So Cliff's here for any questions, if we have any. Are there any comments from anybody on this, Councillor Clare?
And I just want to say, anyone else want to chip in first? This is a complex one. It's the most dangerous, I think it's the second, most dangerous crossing, level crossing in the southeast, or possibly in the country, due to the amount of contacts. Basically, the current level crossing cuts the town in half, with the council offices being on the south and the retail being on the north. There have been some issues with the voting going about to get the land, but if we look at the first part of the project where we built new council offices, we didn't have to go down the seat-go route. We worked very well with the local businesses relocation or adequate amounts of buyout, which has allowed us to pretty much deliver the offices and their offices, which means we can now release land back to the 84 properties plus the business retail units underneath. So that's gone well. We know that bit's works, and we will be applying the same processes as we move forward with this. Again, because of number one, because of COVID, we have a private owner of the retail area who's also looking to completely redevelop it. Actually, fantastic plans for the whole of the retail side of the tracks. So it's a case of working with them rather than just plonking something in and say work around it. So there's a lot of moving parts in this particular project. So certainly support the recommendations here. A lot of this is, as outlined, is land acquisition, and this will just give the officers enough time to be able to plough on and get that done. They did a fantastic job so far on the council offices side of it, and I don't think that will change.
Thank you. Any other queries? Okay, thank you. So we're asked to note the update of the project on project delivery, including the increase in project costs and the associated identified value for money risk. We're asked to note that a project change request and an updated value for money assessment will be presented to the board in April 2022. If it cannot be demonstrated that the project continues to offer high value for money and therefore doesn't meet the requirements of the assurance framework, the board will be asked to consider the clawback of LGF funding allocated to the project. And we're asked to agree that the LGF spend on the project should be placed on hold until it can be demonstrated the project continues to offer high value for money. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Keith, for joining us, just in case we had any questions. Okay, let's move on swiftly then to item 12. Howard, it's LGF high risk project update on the A13 and A28.
Thanks, Chair. So this report provides an update on the delivery of the A13 widening and the A28 Surrey Link Road LGF projects, which have been identified as high risk. Firstly, the A13 widening. The board has been regularly updated on a series of issues that have arisen during the delivery of this project, some of which have caused construction costs to rise. As outlined in the report, progress over the new year was slower than had been expected due to COVID-19 related sickness, supply chain issues, and temperature variations, which caused difficulties with the laying of certain materials. Due to these delays, it is now expected that the main highway works will complete in March 2022 rather than February, as previously been reported. Completion of these works will allow the full opening of the new road. There are, however, other works which need to be completed, including delayed balance pond work and planting. And these works are expected to take place after the road is open. and is expected that these works will be completed in the summer of 2022. However, it is possible that the planting will be delayed until November 2022, seasonal planting. The A28 Surrey Link Road, the board received a full update on the project in November 2021, which provided an updated programme and budget. The programme and budget remain as outlined at the last meeting, with completion of the road expected by June 2025. Since the last board meeting, Carter Jones has been engaged as property consultants to progress the voluntary land acquisition negotiations. And in addition, expressions of interest have been sought for the design and build contract. 6 contractors with the appropriate skills and experience have completed the selection questionnaire, and these will be assessed to identify the best 4 tenders to take through to the next stage of the procurement process. A further update on the procurement process will be provided at the April meeting. Further update on both projects will be presented to the board in April. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As you know, we did want to make sure that each high-risk project continues to come back to the board. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Goss.
Yeah, no, just say on the story, I mean, it's all board members I think will be aware that it's been one of the more operatic of the projects that we've had over a long time. So it's actually nice. There's really no drama in this report. In fact, just adding to what was mentioned, apparently we've got inflation costs fully accounted for, developer contributions index linked back to when the 106 agreements were signed in March 2021. So all in line.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gallagher.
I think Roger and I could argue at length on which one's been more problematic. Literally with the exception of finding some ancient village buried underneath the A13, nothing else really. Yeah, but no, we've stopped digging. It's just simple things. The drainage level had to be massively increased, which meant we need to get more very specialist equipment in, which had a long lead time, and then there's this pandemic thing that really sort of threw everything behind. It's surprising as well that the mapping that was done. So there were gas pipelines where there shouldn't have been gas pipelines, and there wasn't gas pipelines where there should have been. So I'm not going to point fingers at the council for not doing the maps properly when they did it last time. However, it's just a historic issue, it's just been an absolute nightmare. But it is coming. That nightmare is coming to an end, and as mentioned, we might need to delay the planting until that planting season at the end of this year. But we are, like Richard would say, getting there. It's now nearly at that end. I think we're sort of looking at the middle to end of March to actually have it open at last.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley, and then Councillor Wegland.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Fully supportive of this. I think Glenn knows that, and having got stuck in the traffic jam this morning because the lorry broke down in the Foxing pocket. I fully think this is really working well now. You can see the difference. You can see the quality of work as well. And yeah, fully supportive of what's going on.
And when it's open, when we're not shut down for weekend work, it really does flow really good well.
But you were inviting me to cut the ribbon, weren't you? Did I get that wrong?
No, you didn't get that wrong. We can't afford ribbon.
Thank you, Councillor Wegland.
Well, leaving aside the entirely unjustified that came from my right, I would venture to suggest that we could actually do with this getting on the basis of sort of stop the traffic diverting onto our network. So entirely and completely supportive of this. I think it's a good scheme. I'd only mention in relation to the point that Rob mentioned that I'm hoping that at some point the consequences of digitalisation of what were formerly hard copy plans, which has plagued my life in another capacity for as long as I can remember, is going to iron itself out of the system at some point. But I would urge, as I often do on contractors, that they actually do more of the hard land type investigations in order to be sure that whatever has been digitalised doesn't leave them. I'm still looking at a really fun one where 6 feet, 6 feet has caused more grief than anyone can possibly imagine. So you may lead me to my private grief on that subject. I'm entirely supportive of this one.
Thank you very much. Okay, Simon.
Just one very quick one to avoid any further operatics. Just make sure we change the front page, I think, to of the A29s, the A28. Otherwise,
Minor
Yeah. Yes, no, that's good. Well, thank you very much. So on the A13, we're widening, we're asked to note the update on the project and note a further update will be brought to April 2022 board meeting. And on the A28, Surrey Link Road, we're also asked to note the update on the project and note a further update will be brought also to the April 2022 board meeting. Okay, let's go on to number 30, item 13, which is the Maidstone Integrated Transport LGF project update. Helen.
Thank you. So this report provides an update on all three phases of the Maidstone Integrated Transport Package. However, I'm just going to focus on phase one of the project and the current position with regards to listed building consent, which is required to allow the relocation of the Ragstone Wall and Moat Park. At September 21 board meeting, the board were made aware that listed building consent rather than planning consent was required to enable the relocation of the wall. At that time, it was expected that the consent would be in place by December 21 and that an update would be provided at this meeting. The listed building consent application was considered by Maidstone Borough Council Planning Committee on the 16th of December, and it was agreed to defer a decision on the application to the next Planning Committee meeting to allow further clarification and information to be provided. It is now expected the application will be considered on the 17th of February. As this is the second time the project has been unable to secure the required consent in line with agreed timetable, there are options available to the board, including reallocation of the LGF funding awarded to phase one of the project, approximately 1.8 million, or placing LGF spend on hold, either for the entire project or just phase one, whilst awaiting the award of the final consent. However, the reasons for deferral of decision on the listed building consent in December focus on the need for additional information to allow the planning committee to make a more informed decision. It is anticipated that Kent County Council will be able to respond fully to these points at the next planning committee meeting. As the application is due to be considered next week, it is recommended that at this time, the LGF funding remains allocated to the project, and additional time is allowed for Kent County Council to secure the consent. A further update will be provided for the next board meeting. If this update indicates that listed building consent has been refused, the planning committee decision has been further deferred, or that progress towards delivering the project has stalled, the board will be asked to consider whether all or half of the LGF funding should be returned for reallocation to alternative.
Thank you. Okay. Any councillor Goff?
Just to add that I entirely agree with what's been described in how the Ragstone Wall issue has been dealt with. Just add that apparently since then there's been quite a positive meeting of the Joint Transportation Board, which brings together the district and county councillors in the area looking at highway related issues. So hopefully that gives us a fair sign that we're moving towards a successful resolution of this next week. So I think good to go ahead on the basis of what's described and fully recognise that we do need to demonstrate this is actually happening. So we'll consider that, hopefully have better news for it at the next meeting.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so we're asked to note the update on project delivery. And we asked whether we agree to allow the project until the April board meeting, the 29th of April 2022, to secure the listed building consent required to enable the relocation of the Ragstone Wall associated with Moat Park, which is required to enable delivery of phase one of the project. Do you agree?
I agree.
Thank you. Note that the further delivery update will be brought to the April 2022 board meeting, which will include confirmation as to whether the required consent to relocate the Ragstone Wall has been secured. So we do not need to look at item 14, which is the LGF additional funding award, as the additional funding hasn't been reallocated, hasn't come back. We're going to move now on to item 15, which is the Queensway Gateway Road project update. I believe that Richard Dawson is going to provide an update on this project. Richard, are you there? See you, Nate. Oh, yeah, marvellous. Thank you. Hello.
Hello, Sarah, and hello to the rest of the board. I'm sorry, it's just been...
Morning. Are you able to give us an update then, please?
Yeah, can you hear me well enough? Because I know we had some issues last time, so I just wanted to check.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh no.
Okay, if there is any problems, if you could just wave your hand, and I'll take off my video.
Oh, you've just
Oh,
disappeared.
no, it's disappeared.
It's gone. It's on mute.
It's disappeared again, so
Take the music.
try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll start then. So on the Queensway Gateway Road, section 3 of the report sets out the context for the Queensway Gateway Road. With the previous meeting having been only a few months ago, I will take the opportunity to present to the board the key progress updates from section 4 onwards in the report. I will start by covering the signalised connection to the A21. As previously reported to the board, Sea Change Sussex have been progressing a solution to connect the road to the A21 to the signalised connection, which will realise the employment and wider benefits of the scheme, which involves the introduction of traffic lights at the junction between the A21 road with priority lanes on the A21. Since the last update to the board, progress continues to be made on the junction design, which meets the requirements of the two highways authorities, East Sussex County Council and National Highways. Moreover, transport modelling work has been presented to National Highways, which demonstrated that the signalised connection would work satisfactorily and would not have a wider detrimental impact on the strategic and local road networks. National Highways have provided an in-principle technical approval of the modelling aspects. This design has now received Road Safety Audit Stage 1 approval from National Highways, and the Stage 2 Road Safety Audit has been submitted by Sea Change Sussex to the two authorities on the 19th. Subject to the designs being acceptable, technical approval is expected to be given this spring, with the preparation of the necessary legal agreements with the County Council and National Highways currently running in parallel to seek technical design approval. So in view of this, I wish to cover some critical milestones and timescales, including the likes of the Section 278s, traffic regulation orders, and construction. But a more helpful guide is presented in Table 2 in Section 6.1. This sets out the key mark. Sorry, Sarah, can you still hear me?
You are very much coming in and out, so it's very hard to kind of get a grasp of what exactly you're saying. And
in the report.
My colleague has told me that the written report is very clear, so unless Richard has anything that's vital, I think we can move on and turn it to you.
Okay, Richard, I think we've lost you completely now anyway.
Hello, Sarah, can you still hear me? I'm happy to carry on without my video, if that's helpful.
We can hear you, but did you hear Councillor Glazier just suggest something?
I did, and I will just, as I say, I refer basically to the helpful guide in presented in Table 2, and I'll just summarise a few final points if that's permitted.
What is it anything different from the report? Yeah, so I think, yes, that's the clear question, Richard. Is there anything different from what you say in the report that you would like to bring to our attention?
No, I'll leave it as written in the report, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, because otherwise we'll spend a lot of time trying to understand what you're saying.
You might want to move to South End. We got
as well. Alternatively, we could move to East Sussex, where we won't have so much distance for it to go. But there you go, which I think is a very good move for the next meeting.
Okay, so thank you, Richard. So unless there's anything else you'd like to say, I'll hand over now to Helen.
Thank you. So as the board are aware, delivery of this project has been significantly delayed compared to the timeline set out within the business case. However, the report indicates that there's been no further slippage in delivery since the last update to the board. A milestone table has now been provided, as Richard was referencing, which sets out the expected timeline for securing the majority of the outstanding approvals and completion of the required legal agreements. Further detail on some elements, including the timeline for the consultation on and completion of the TRO required for the prohibition of parking on Whitworth Road, will be sought for the next board meeting. As outlined at the November meeting, consideration will be given to the potential for the signalised connection to be retained as a long-term solution rather than being used as a temporary option whilst the permanent roundabout progress. The performance of the signalised connection will be monitored for up to 6 months after opening to establish whether it satisfactorily mitigates the identified traffic issues or if further works are required. It is therefore expected that this decision will not be taken until late 2022. At this point, if the signalised connection is retained as a permanent solution, a formal project change request, which revisits the benefits offered by the project and provides assurances that the project continues to offer high value for money, will be brought forward for board consideration. The delay in delivering the final section of the road presents the risk of realisation of the traffic-related benefits set out in the business case. The connection with the A21 is critical to ensuring that levels of congestion are reduced. The majority of the employment benefits expected to be realised as a result of the delivery of the new road relate to the development of designated employment sites within the Hastings-Bexhill growth corridor. These sites have been unlocked through construction work completed to date. However, the timeline for the development of these sites and the realisation of the employment benefits remains unclear at the current time. However, it is apparent that these benefits will be realised at a much later date than anticipated in the original business.
Thank you. Any comments or queries from anybody?
I think I need to comment and just say, once again, I look forward to traffic flowing down this road, and so it can be assessed as to the suitability or not of the signals junction, which we hope will be a success.
Thank you, Councillor Glazer. Okay, I'd like us to note the latest position on the delivery of the projects and steps which need to be taken to secure completion, and note that a decision on the selection of the preferred junction solution will be made at the latter part of 2022, following a period for sufficient evidence to be gathered on the impact of the signalised junction, and ask whether we agree that the board will be provided with a further update on the project, which updates the project delivery plan and associated milestones at its meeting on the 29th of April 2022. Thank you. Okay, let's move on swiftly to item 16, which is London Gateway Stamford La Hope LGF project update. I'm handing over to Keith this time, who you do get to speak.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay.
Thank you.
So Stamford La Hope Station, as outlined in the report, is divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 is the new station buildings, footbridge, widened platforms and customer information link. Phase 2 is the transport hub consisting of the car passengers, drop-off, the taxi rank positions, bus pickup, waiting facilities and protected walking routes. So on delivery progress, the tenders for Phase 1, the station buildings, which is a detailed design and construction contract, were submitted on the 7th of January 2022 on plan. The evaluation is going very well on the tenders, and we're looking to award a contract in March 22, with the enabling work starting on site this summer and a completion of around October, November in 23. A key assumption, very important for the staging, is that Phase 1 will require the land designated for Phase 2 for the construction laydown area. So some large modular designs will be shipped into the site and then craned into position. So that land is essential for the construction, which will mean Phase 2 would not start until Phase 1 is complete. However, we're discussing the logistics with the tenderers, and there may be an opportunity to start slightly earlier when we get the detailed programme and construction planning in place. On Phase 2, the design team have had the pre-app discussions on the concept plans with planners and developing design options to address these issues raised and certain site conditions. Resolution of the issues will be reflected in a revised concept design and planning application, which is forecast at the moment for May of June this year. Phase 2, which was outlined at the last committee meeting, is now forecast as July 24. We're also looking at potential revised demand from other projects in the area and also the impact of the recent designation of the Thames Freeport. And this may result in revised passenger demand, a different business case, scope and cost plan. So that's an opportunity for slightly more expansive thinking to take account of the future. Meanwhile, the current budget is sufficient for Phase 1 and Phase 2 as it is currently designed. There are a number of issues and risks I'll concentrate mainly on the opportunity, which is really that when we create our partnership with the contractor, the carrot that we have is the phase 2, and there could be significant efficiencies by negotiating that contract with an embedded contractor. So that's my report for now. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, go for it, Howard.
Okay, at the November 2021 somewhere that board meeting, it was agreed to extend the project completion date to July 2024. That this was subject to revised business case being submitted for consideration for the April 2022 board meeting. The revised business case is required to provide assurances around the value for money offered by the project, the existence of a full funding package, and confirmation of the benefits expected to be realised. The updated business case needs to address the increased costs outlined within the report, any amendments to the scope of phase 2 of the project, and should revisit the benefits to be realised as a result of the project. This should include an updated profile for the realisation of these benefits alongside an updated value for money assessment, which demonstrates that the project continues to offer high value for money. Procurement of a construction contractor to deliver phase 1 of the project is ongoing, as Keith mentioned, and it is expected that the appointment of a contractor will be confirmed at the April 2022 board meeting. Proposals for phase 2 of the project continue to be developed. Again, Keith mentioned this. However, at this stage, there are little details available as it stands. Further details on the proposals for this stage of the project will be required to enable the business case to be meaningfully updated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Joseph.
Thanks, Chair. Just to really echo what Katie said, since this original plan started, which was roughly when I first became councillor, it seems to be 1 million years ago, it's changed, it's morphed, but also what's happened in Thurrock has changed and morphed. We're now at the very final stage of getting the Freeport agreed, and whilst it's very nice for Prime Minister to say 4 times last week that it's the new Freeport at Tilbury, it doesn't stop at Tilbury, it actually goes all the way up to so I, in the same way as Keith, see a lot of opportunities as that expands for the passenger numbers also to increase, and the numbers to increase at the port, and indeed the associated projects that are around it that are currently going through planning. Ironically, a delay in our planning being granted, one of which was because of the cost, which obviously we know is not planning consideration, added more cost because it was delayed by months because we didn't have the obviously planning permission to move forward, but we are in a much better place now. So I would hope that once the updated plans are put forward, we'll see, if not the same, hopefully more of benefit to cost ratio for this. It is a good project, it's a difficult project. And again, it's one of these, suddenly you find out there's Japanese knotweed or whatever. The next problem is as you start to go through the process. So hopefully this will be supported when it comes back with the updated plan. That will be a real benefit for people of Thurrock and all those that we work in Freeport.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're asked to note the update on the project and progress towards the submission of an updated business case, which sets out the value for money and benefits offered by the project to be considered at the board at April 2022 meeting. Thank you, Keith, for presenting. Okay, let's move on now to item 17, which is an update on the M2 Junction 5 LGF project. Helen.
Thank you. So this report provides an update on the M3 Junction 5 improvement project, which has received an LGF allocation of 1.6 million. It was confirmed at the September 21 board meeting that the conditions attached to the release of the LGF funding have been met, and that an update would be provided on the project at this meeting. The report clearly sets out the needs of the project and the improvements that will be delivered to help mitigate the existing traffic issues at the junction, which is located between Maidstone and Sittingbourne. Following a public inquiry, the Secretary of State for Transport approved the project in June 21, and work has now commenced on site to deliver the planned improvements. Initial work has predominantly focused on site clearance and utility diversion, with the main construction work expected to take place over the coming years, with project completion expected in winter 2024.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or queries? No. So we're asked to note the update on the project delivery. Thank you. So item 18 is the Growing Places Fund Programme update. Helen.
So this report provides the usual update on the Growing Places Fund Programme and seeks board approval for the accelerated drawdown of funding awarded to support the no-use empty commercial phase 2 project and the revision to the repayment schedule for the Fitted Rigging House project. As the board are aware, the no-use empty scheme is well established in Kent and has been supported through the GPF on a number of occasions. The no-use empty commercial phase 2 project was awarded funding in February 2021. An initial drawdown has enabled provision of short-term secured loans in relation to 6 long-term empty commercial properties across Kent. There continues to be strong demand for the no-use empty commercial scheme, and as a result, Kent County Council have requested accelerated drawdown of the £750,000, which was originally programmed for drawdown in 22-23. There is sufficient GPF funding available in 21-22 to support this drawdown if the board choose to approve this request. So moving on to the Fitted Rigging House. This project was completed in March 2020 and as set out in the report provided commercial space at the Chatham Historic Dockyard, which has enabled the delivery of 195 projects to date. In October 2021, Medway Council advised that they had been successful in their application for levelling up fund funding for a package of works in Chatham. One element of these works, which falls within the remit of the Chatham Historic Dockyard Trust, is the Fitted Rigging House project, which will bring the southern end of the Fitted Rigging House into effective use, creating space for creative industries. Government has indicated that the levelling up fund funding will be issued biannually, meaning that expenditure will be incurred in advance of receipt of the grant funding. This will, in conjunction with Chatham Dockyard Trust commitment to provide match funding to support project delivery, place considerable pressure on the trust's cash flow. To reduce this pressure, a revised repayment schedule has been submitted for consideration at this meeting. It should be noted that due to the late submission of this request, the Chatham Historic Dockyard Trust have committed to making the initial £100,000 payment, which is due next month. And finally, just note that we have now received a signed declaration from Medway Council Section 151 officer as referenced in the report, and therefore the recommendation will be, this requirement will be removed from the recommendation.
Thank you. Any comments or queries from anybody? No. So we're asked to note the updated position on the GPF programme. We're asked, do you approve the accelerated drawdown of funding for the no-use empty commercial phase 2 project? Agreed. Thank you. And do you approve the revised repayment schedule for the Fitted Rigging House project and agree that despite repayments not being made in line with the original repayment schedule, no interest will be charged on the loan?
Agreed.
Very much. Okay, so item 19, which is the SELEP finance report update. Lorna, quickly shift around. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. So, good morning. So this item just gives an update on the latest forecast position for the SELEP budget. Overall, the position shows an improved position over that reported back in November, and that's primarily due to the eventual receipt in December of the remaining 250,000 core fundings that have been outstanding from government following their decision to undertake the NEP review. As the funding's been received so late in the year, there's no plan currently to spend it in this financial year, and it's being used to effectively offset existing planned expenditure, which means that we can then draw down less from reserves in this year and gives us greater opportunity to look at those into next financial year. And the intention is that the strategic board in March, as part of the delivery planning, those options will be considered at that point, and then further considerations will be brought back to this board following that in the next financial year. Other kind of key movements in the budget firstly relate to the fact that we need to reflect the 5 redundancies that are expected in next financial year, and we've therefore had to account for that by setting a provision, which means that we need to request that provision of 112,493, and to fund that, we're looking for a request to from the redundancy reserve that we set aside. I think this board recall we set aside enough funding in the reserve to cover all redundancies that may need to be made in the coming time. So this is the first draw on that reserve to offset that provision. Within the report, the other kind of key movement relates to the COVID support funds. There's two funds. One relates to support for business and one relates to support for skills. Due to the delayed start of those funds and other issues resulting fact of the ongoing pandemic concerns has meant that those programs have been delayed in delivery. So the overall impact in terms of financial position is that the funding will be retained, moved back into the reserve in this financial year, carried forward to be secured to ensure the delivery of those programs through next financial year. One kind of final key point just to highlight is the fact that there has been no confirmation of any new funding into the next financial year from government. So whilst that doesn't increase our risk, because obviously when we set the budget back in November, we placed it on the basis of the fact that there wouldn't be any funding received, but obviously it just underpins that ongoing concerns that we have of the position post 22-23. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions at all or comments? I'm going to make one, which is that I would like to pay tribute both to all of the staff and to the accountable body, Essex County Council, for all their really hard work during what has been an incredibly challenging time for the staff. I thank you, Lorna, thank you to all of the staff team. Thank you, Adam, for steering us through a very challenging time. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Lorna.
Rosemary, did you came on for a moment? Did you have anything?
Just to say thank you.
Okay, so we're asked to note the current forecast net cost of services for 2021-22 is an underspend of £153,000. Approve the appropriation, and do we approve the appropriation from the redundancy reserve of £112,493 to support the establishment of a provision for redundancy costs of the equivalent value?
Agree.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to hand over very sadly to Suzanne for her very last report that she's going to present to this board. Suzanne, operations update.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I will whip through quickly, focusing on new information and some of the stuff that isn't in the report. So first of all, the annual performance review, as Sarah mentioned, we had that this week. Me, Adam, Sarah, Chris, the Chair, and Helen was there, along with Stephanie. We won't have the outcome of that until the new financial year. We did get an indicative score ahead of the meeting on that's based on the pre-work that we did, and the governance and strategy elements were both assessed as meeting requirements. As we mentioned earlier, HMG have some concerns, and it's not just SELEP, it's all LEPs, because all LEPs haven't actually been able to spend the GBS monies, given that it was a very short programme time, and there were considerable delays in getting the money in the grant agreements to us, so we can comment, it being my last day. So there was a number of delays from their end, but they have raised their concerns about the spend of GPS, and we have now, this board has exercised their abilities under the freedoms and flexibilities, and so we hope that that will provide assurance to our colleagues in Whitehall on that point. We'll wait that when we get the outcome of the APR, obviously we'll report it back to this board, but I would suspect that that will not be until, I think we'd be lucky to get it for the April accountability board meeting, to be quite frank. Lorna mentioned the COVID-19 funds, and I just wanted to flag some points there. So we have had some delays there. It took quite a long time to get these funds up and going, but there's also been delays for many other reasons. The way that we designed these funds actually has been allowing us to flex the approach that we've been taking. So we're providing support out there to learners and upskilling people and supporting small businesses. And we built them in that way as a direct result of the issues that we'd had previously with EU funding. So with some of the ESIF funds very tightly locked down, there's no way you can change stuff. And also the Growth Hub funding that we get from government is very strictly governed, and that you can't be very responsive. Whereas I think in our case, we've actually been able to be quite responsive on these points. And both the skills and the business support environment at the moment is very, very complex. There's lots of people who are out there wanting to help. Everybody realised, especially post-pandemic, lots of different organisations, governmental, private organisations out there offering many different types of support, and it's quite difficult to pitch correctly into that point as to where the gaps in the market are. And so because of that, we've actually been able to change our eligibility in some cases. So we've opened up some of the skills support funding to support the underemployed as well as the unemployed. Originally, we had restricted that to the unemployed, but it's clear that there's an issue there with the underemployed, so we've changed that. Some of that as well is we were expecting greater numbers of unemployed when the furlough dropped off, but that hasn't actually manifested. We've adjusted some of the business support to make it more digital, because actually there's a much higher demand for digital now than there was before, as businesses and everybody's got used to working in that digital world. And we've been able to extend deadlines on grant applications, where we've had some businesses, especially in hospitality, have sort of went into a little bit of a hibernation because of the Omicron shutdown. So we've been able to extend that. And I just wanted to flag that. I think it's really useful for people to understand that building this flexibility into these types of programs, we've found, has been just absolutely worth its weight in gold. And as partners are working on UK SDF and these types of programs in the future, we'd be really happy to share those learnings with you, because that really has worked for us. So whilst there are some delays, we think that we're managing that quite actively. Are there any questions on those two pieces before I move on? No, I'm not going to go through all the national insurance changes. I'm sure you can read them all yourselves there. They are fairly immaterial changes, and just making sure that we are all shipshape in this Bristol fashion. The KPIs, again, I'm not going to go into too much, but I did just want to offer our thanks to the federated lead officers who have made a concerted effort since the last meeting to publish their minutes and agendas and etc. as we had requested. So thank you guys for that. On to risk quickly. So as you can see in the report, there has been a number of changes to the risk register, and some of the risks actually have manifested over the last few months, which we've been dealing with through the redundancies and so on and so forth, and some have dropped off. As everybody knows, the Levelling Up white paper has been published. It didn't have a huge amount of information in there for the future of LEPs. So whilst it has been published, there still is a lot of uncertainty that's there. And Adam and the team will be working with partners around this table and others to see what that means in our geography as well, how it works in our geography. I think is a really key point there. So there's still a number of risks, and as Lorna rightly flagged, whilst we've got budget for 22-23, that budget does utilise all of our reserves. And so beyond March 23, the question mark is still there. One risk that I just wanted to flag with you now, because I think the ranking has changed since the report was written, is regarding the Growth Hub service. So the Growth Hub service is funded by specific grants from BASE. We have heard nothing on the future funding for next financial year. We were told that all the answers would come with the Levelling Up white paper, as we've been told on a number of other things. The Levelling Up white paper didn't mention Growth Hub. It didn't have much detail around business support at all. Because of this uncertainty, we have a hub and spoke model. We have 3 sub-hubs out there, effectively. One that's overseen by Kent County Council, one that's run through Southend Borough Council, and one through East Sussex, all slightly different in their models. East Sussex and Southend are both run by officers in-house, and Kent contract third party for the provision of their services. In previous years, they have always been late with notification on grants, but the uncertainty and the lack of information around the business support reform piece means that it's impossible really for those authorities to underwrite that risk into next year, because we can't quantify how long that risk is there for, or whether there's any appetite essentially for the Growth Hub model to continue as it is. So there's a real risk now that there's going to be a break in service for what the Growth Hub does. Even if we do get funding confirmation, there comes a point, there's a lead in around needing to get that out. So we might get the funding confirmation, but there'll still be a break in service whilst the financial sort of agreements between the partners are put into place. And we're trying to mitigate it, trying to manage it, trying to, again, this is the same for all LEPs across the country, all growth hubs. There's letters go to the Secretary of State and so on, and we are flagging it. I just wanted to flag that risk with you now, so it really is a very real and risk out there, and it's the SMEs who will be ultimately the people that will miss out, because we do have a lot of SMEs who are accessing that support. There'll be some that will be in mid-process of being supported as well. But we'll flag that, and there's a further report coming to March Strategic Board to give more details on where we are with that at that point. Yeah.
Thank you. Wait a minute.
Thank you for that. Just a quick question, which is on the assurance framework, and so in light of some of our discussions, well, not just today, but it talks here about the maximum extension offered to a GDF project is 6 months to 30th of September. Now, clearly, the conversation we had about Tech4 earlier on was takes us potentially to a different place. But also, I think there's a couple of other projects which we've historically agreed, which go beyond that. So I just wonder about that, whether that's sensible to have it in that form at the moment.
So at the moment, we've got the assurance framework as the policy is, as we've agreed within this board and with strategic board. But yes, that's what Helen's working on. We think there needs to now be a review as we move into April. That 6 months is eroded, isn't it? So we need to review that policy. So that will be coming to April for this board to consider. So then we'll have to update the insurance framework again at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Suzanne. So in terms of process, we are asked to note the proposed changes to the assurance framework as highlighted in Appendix A. We're also asked to note the update on the assurance framework compliance monitoring at Appendix B and governance KPIs at Appendix C, and note the changes to the risk register at Appendix D. Thank you. So we're moving now on to any other business, and the any other business that I would like to mention is to thank Suzanne for all that she has done. Her eye for detail and yet her ability to think strategically is remarkable. I personally have really enjoyed working with her. I will miss her dreadfully, as I know many of us will. I know the staff will too. She has been the most wonderful person to work with. I am very jealous of Braintree, and thank you for all your amazing service, for all that you've done. And I just want so the date of sorry, two other bits.
Yes, it's just one very small one, if I might, under the AOB. This is in relation to Fair Glen, which is mentioned briefly in passing in paragraph 10 of the report. We have a number of issues with Fair Glen, which we're working our way through, but one of the ones that's been causing the most difficulty has been the delays associated with the Department of Transport and Business Case approval. They've continually asked us for above standard modelling, and then they delayed progress most notably with our request for them, or their request that we use the Lower Thames Crossing based model, and then refusing to send that to us on arguments about sensitivity for approximately 18 months. That cost us about 350,000 in terms of programme delays. We're not best pleased with that. They've also changed their stance on the full business case submission, and these are my words, not DFT's, but essentially originally they were saying you will not buy the land until you receive the DFT contribution, and now the DFT will not sign off the SBC to release the funding until all land parcels are in our ownership. This has not helped, to put it mildly. The reason I've just raised this is simply because our officers have spent letters to DFT, and we're enormously grateful to Ian Lewis at Opportunity South Essex, who's used his contacts with the Thames Estuary Commission to ensure that Biosphere is made aware of that, and that letter has gone off. Because we were sending that letter, the offer of support, which was kindly received from SELEP, that you would assist us with adding your weight to what was going on, was thought to be a premature. It's given that we ought to see where we were getting to, but it is now that the letter has gone in, we do feel that there will be more value in SELEP getting involved should we wish to request it. I thought it appropriate just to bring it to this board and just have your confirmation that you would be happy for us to do that, as it were, offline, but just in the knowledge that we would very much value that.
Absolutely. It's the first time we've had to do this in the last few years, particularly with the Department of Transport. We've all had troubles.
I absolutely understand that, and I think we've been supportive of that as well.
Absolutely, we will do what we can when needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Goff.
It wouldn't be complete without my mentioning that the business section 151 approved business case, I think arrived half an hour ago.
Marvellous. Thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is on the 29th of April 2022 at Mid Kent College, Maidstone campus. We're looking forward to visiting, and I don't believe there is any other urgent business. So thank you all very much, and have a good.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to